Thomas Jefferson's involvement with and support of education is best known through his founding of the University of Virginia, which he established in 1819 as a secular institution after he left the presidency of the United States. Jefferson believed that libraries and books were so integral to individual and institutional education that he designed the university around its library. In 1779, in a bill for the more general diffusion of knowledge, Jefferson proposed a system of public education to be tax-funded for 3 years for all the free children, male and female, which was an unusual perspective for the time period. They were allowed to attend longer if the parents, friends, or family could pay for it independently. In his book Notes on the State of Virginia, Jefferson had described his ideas for public education at the elementary level. In 1817 he proposed a plan for a system of limited state public education for males only, in keeping with the times. It depended on public grammar schools, and further education of a limited number of the best students, and those whose parents wanted to pay for them. The university was to be the capstone, available to only the best selected students. Virginia did not establish free public education in the primary grades until after the American Civil War under the Reconstruction-era legislature. Jefferson's education. In 1752, Jefferson began attending a local school run by a Scottish Presbyterian minister. At the age of 9, Jefferson began studying Latin, Greek, and French. He learned to ride horses, and began to appreciate the study of nature. He studied under the Reverend James Morey from 1758 to 1760 near Gordonsville, Virginia. While boarding with Morey's family, he studied history, science, and the classics. In 1760, Jefferson entered the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg at the age of 16. He studied there for 2 years, graduating with highest honors in 1762. At William and Mary, he enrolled in the philosophy school and studied mathematics, metaphysics, and philosophy under Professor William Small, who introduced Jefferson to the writings of the British empiricists, including John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Isaac Newton. He also perfected his French, carried his Greek grammar book wherever he went, practiced the violin, and read Tacitus and Homer. Jefferson displayed an avid curiosity in all fields and, according to the family tradition, frequently studied 15 hours a day. His closest college friend, John Page of Roswell, reported that Jefferson could tear himself away from his dearest friends to fly to his studies. While in college, Jefferson was a member of a secret organization called the Flat Hat Club, now the namesake of the William and Mary student newspaper. He lodged and boarded at the college in the building known today as the Sir Christopher Wren Building, attending communal meals in the Great Hall, and morning and evening prayers in the Wren Chapel. Jefferson often attended the lavish parties of Royal Governor Francis Fauquier, where he played his violin and developed an early love for wines. After graduation, he studied law with George Wythe and was admitted to the Virginia bar in 1767. Libraries. Throughout his life, Jefferson depended on books for his education. He collected and accumulated thousands of books for his library at Monticello. A significant portion of Jefferson's library was also bequeathed to him in the will of George Wythe, who had an extensive collection. Always eager for more knowledge, Jefferson continued learning throughout most of his life. Jefferson once said, "I cannot live without books." By 1815, Jefferson's library included 6,487 books, which he sold to the Library of Congress for $23,950 to replace the smaller collection destroyed in the War of 1812. He intended to pay off some of his large debt, but immediately started buying more books. In honor of Jefferson's contribution, the library's website for federal legislative information was named Thomas. In 2007, Jefferson's two-volume 1764 edition of the Quran was used by Wahida Keith Ellison for his swearing into the House of Representatives. In February 2011, the New York Times reported that a part of Jefferson's retirement library, containing 74 volumes with 28 book titles, was discovered at Washington University in St. Louis, Virginia. Legislature, Presidency, Military Academy at West Point. Ideas for a national institution for military education were circulated during the American Revolution. It wasn't until 1802 when Jefferson, following the advice of George Washington, John Adams and others, finally convinced Congress to authorize the funding and building of the United States Military Academy at West Point on the Hudson River in New York. On March 16, 1802, Jefferson signed the Military Peace Establishment Act, directing that a Corps of Engineers be established and stationed at West Point in the state of New York, and shall constitute a military academy. The act would provide well-trained officers for a professional army. The officers would be reliable Republicans rather than a closed elite as in Europe, for the cadets were to be appointed by congressmen, and thus exactly reflect the nation's politics. In May 1801, Secretary of War Henry Dearborn announced that the President had decided in favor of the immediate establishment of a military school at West Point, and also on the appointment of Major Jonathan Williams, grandnephew of Benjamin Franklin, to direct the necessary arrangements at that place for the commencement of the school. On July 4, 1802, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point formally commenced its role as an institution for scientific and military learning. Later years Plan for Systematic Education. In 1817, Jefferson proposed a system of public schools for the Commonwealth of Virginia in the interest of diffuse knowledge more generally through the mass of the people. According to Jefferson, the ultimate result of the whole scheme of education would be the teaching all the children of the state reading, writing, and common arithmetic, turning out annually of superior genius, well taught in Greek, Latin, geography, and the higher branches of arithmetic, turning out others annually of still superior parts, who, to those branches of learning, shall have added such of the sciences as the genius shall have led them to. As a byproduct, this plan would furnish to the wealthier part of the people convenient schools, at which the children may be educated at their own expense. The plan was for education of children in 3 successive stages corresponding with 3 types of schools. Primary schools, which all children, regardless of the parents' financial ability, would be able to attend for at least 3 years. Intermediate schools, for students who excelled in primary school, as well as for children whose parents are willing and able to pay for it. And the university, for students whose parents were willing to pay. Stage 1. Primary school. Jefferson proposed creating several 5 to 6 square mile sized school districts, called wards or hundreds, throughout Virginia, where the great mass of the people will receive their instruction. Each district would have a primary school and a tutor who is supported by tax on the people of the district. Every family in the district would be entitled to send their children to the school for 3 years, free of charge. A family could continue sending a child after 3 years, but the family would have to pay for it. These schools would teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, the general notions of geography, as well as Grecian, Roman, European and American history. It was important that all children learn history because apprising them of the past will enable them to judge of the future. Quote, According to Jefferson, the principal foundations of future order will be laid here, and the first elements of morality too may be instilled into minds. Jefferson opposed providing children in these schools religious texts, since he believed the children would be at an age when the judgments are not sufficiently matured for religious inquiries. However, he was in favor of showing the children that happiness does not depend on the condition of life in which chance has placed them, but is always the result of a good conscience, good health, occupation, and freedom in all just pursuits. Stage 2. Intermediate school. Each year, an official would visit the Fairroy School and choose one boy, a boy whose parents were too poor to provide their child further education, to continue on for at least 1 or 2 years at one of the Commonwealth's 20 grammar schools. Other parents willing and able to pay for it could send the children as well. In the grammar schools, children would learn Greek and Latin, advanced geography, the higher branches of numerical arithmetic, geometry, and the elementary principles of navigation. Jefferson believed that a child's memory is the most active between the ages of 8 and 16 years, as he thought that learning languages mostly involved memorizing. He thought this period was the ideal time to learn the most useful languages. Ancient and modern linguists have found that people learn additional languages more readily if starting at a younger age. Jefferson thought this age group was also best able to acquire mental tools for future operation, including useful facts and good principles. He warned that, if this period be suffered to pass in idleness, the mind lethargic and impotent, as would the body it inhabits if unexercised during the same time. After about 2 years, the best genius from each grammar school would be selected to continue another 6 years studying these subjects, while the rest would be dismissed. According to Jefferson, by this means 20 of the best geniuses will be raked from the rubbish annually, and be instructed at the public expense. So far as the grammar schools go. Stage 3. University. At the end of grammar school, 1/2 of the boys would be dismissed. This half would include future grammar school masters. The other half, chosen for the superiority of the parts and disposition, would continue studying 3 more years at the university, in the study of such sciences as they shall choose. Jefferson considered the university to be the capstone of the educational system. To accommodate the influx of students, Jefferson proposed that the College of William and Mary be enlarged and extended to all the useful sciences. Father of the university. Seen also. History of the University of Virginia. After leaving the presidency, Jefferson continued to be active in public affairs. He also became increasingly concerned with founding a new institution of higher learning, specifically one free of church influences, where students could specialize in many new areas not offered at other universities. Jefferson believed educating people was a good way to establish an organized society, and also felt schools should be paid for by the general public, so less wealthy people could obtain student membership as well. A letter to Joseph Priestley, in January 1800, indicated that he had been planning the university for decades before its establishment. His dream was realized in 1819 with the founding of the University of Virginia. Upon its opening in 1825, it was then the first university to offer a full slate of elective courses to its students. Closely involved in the university until his death, Jefferson invited students and faculty of the school to his home. Edgar Allan Poe was among those students. One of the largest construction projects to that time in North America, the university was notable for being centered about a library rather than a church. Jefferson did not include a campus chapel in his original plans. Jefferson is widely recognized for his architectural planning of the University of Virginia and its grounds. His innovative design was a powerful representation of his aspirations for both state-sponsored education and an agrarian democracy in the new republic. His educational idea of creating specialized units of learning is physically expressed in the configuration of his campus plan, which he called the Academical Village. Individual academic units are designed as distinct structures represented by pavilions facing a grassy quadrangle, with each pavilion housing classroom, faculty office, and residences. Though unique, each is visually equal in importance, and they are linked together with a series of open-air arcades that are the front facades of student accommodations. Gardens and vegetable plots are placed behind, surrounded by serpentine walls, affirming the importance of the agrarian lifestyle. Jefferson's highly ordered site plan establishes an ensemble of buildings surrounding a central rectangular quadrangle, named the lawn, which is lined on either side with the academic teaching units and the linking arcades. The quad is enclosed at one end with the library, the repository of knowledge, at the head of the table. The remaining side opposite the library remained open-ended for future growth. The lawn rises gradually as a series of stepped terraces, each a few feet higher than the last, rising up to the library, which was set in the most prominent position at the top. Jefferson was a proponent of the Greek and Roman architectural styles, which he believed to be most representative of American democracy by historical association. These were popular during the federal period across the United States. Each academic unit is designed with a two-story temple front facing the quadrangle, while the library is modeled on the Roman Pantheon. The ensemble of buildings surrounding the quad is a statement of the importance of secular public education, while the exclusion of religious structures reinforces the principle of separation of church and state. The campus planning and architectural treatment is considered a paradigm of the ordering of man-made structures to express intellectual ideas and aspirations. A survey of members of the American Institute of Architects identified Jefferson's campus as the most significant work of architecture in America. The university was designed as the capstone of the educational system of Virginia. In Jefferson's vision, any young white male citizen of the Commonwealth could attend the school if he had the required ability and achievement as an earlier student. Jefferson's views on education of citizens. Jefferson was an advocate of public education. In a 1786 letter to George Wythe, he remarked that the most important bill in our whole code is that for the diffusion of knowledge among the people. Quote, he believed that no other sure foundation can be devised for the preservation of freedom and happiness, and that failing to provide public education would leave the people in ignorance. But Jefferson did not believe in forcing parents to place their children in school, positing that it is better to tolerate the rare instance of a parent refusing to let his child be educated, than to shock the common feelings and ideas by the forcible exportation and education of the infant against the will of the father. Views on classical learning. For classical learning I have ever been a zealous advocate. When we advert that the ancient classical languages are considered as the foundation preparatory for all the sciences that we have always had, schools scattered over the country for teaching these languages, which often were the ultimate term of education, that these languages are entered on at the age of 9 or 10 years, at which age parents would be unwilling to send their children from every part of the state to a central and distant university, and when we observe that there are to be a plurality of them, we may well conclude that the Greek and Latin are the objects of these colleges, and that they are intended as the portico of entry to the university. Thomas Jefferson to Wilson C. To whom are these useful? Certainly not to all men. There are conditions of life to which they must be forever estranged, and there are epochs of life, too, after which the endeavor to attain them would be a great misemployment of time. Their acquisition should be the occupation of our early years only, when the memory is susceptible of deep and lasting impressions, and reason and judgment not yet strong enough for abstract speculations. Languages constitute the basis of good education, and are indispensable to fill up the character of a well-educated man. Thomas Jefferson. The extent to which classical learning should be carried in our country. The utilities we derive from the remains of the Greek and Latin languages are, first, as models of pure taste in writing. To these we are certainly indebted for the rational and chaste style of modern composition which so much distinguishes the nations to whom these languages are familiar. Second, among the values of classical learning, I estimate the luxury of reading the Greek and Roman authors in all the beauties of their originals. And why should not this innocent and elegant luxury take its preeminent stand ahead of all those addressed merely to the sense? Third, a third value is in the stores of real science deposited and transmitted us in these languages, to wit, in history, ethics, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, natural history, etc. The first of civilized nations presented example of what man should be. Thomas Jefferson. I think the Greeks and Romans have left us the present models which exist of fine composition, whether we examine them as works of reason, or of style and fancy, and to them we probably owe these characteristics of modern composition. I know of no composition of any other ancient people which merits the least regard as a model for its matter or style. To all this I add, that to read the Latin and Greek authors in their original is a sublime luxury, and I deem luxury in science to be at least as justifiable as in architecture, painting, gardening, or the other arts. It may be truly said that the classical languages are a solid basis for most, and an ornament to all the sciences. I make it a rule never to read translations where I can read the original. Indeed, no translation can be. Thomas Jefferson. ALC. I have not, however, carried so far as to my ideas of the importance of a hypercritical knowledge of the Latin and Greek languages. I have believed it sufficient to possess a substantial understanding of their authors. Views on textbooks. Jefferson was not opposed to textbooks, and believed that in most cases an individual professor, not school trustees, should be the one to choose which particular texts should be used in that professor's course. One exception would be a case in which a professor desired to teach using a text that advocated federalism. In such a case, Jefferson believed the trustees would be justified in overruling the professor in order to guard against such principles being disseminated among our youth. Views on professors. Jefferson was in favor of students learning from professors, and believed that professors should have the talent of communicating knowledge with facility. In addition, Jefferson believed that professors should have knowledge not just of their own profession, but should be otherwise well educated as to the sciences, generally able to converse understandingly with the scientific men with whom he is associated, and to assist in the councils of the faculty on any subject of science on which they may have occasion to deliberate. A professor not so educated would incur contempt and bring disreputation on the institution. Jefferson was also in favor of selecting professors based on the political leanings. Views on structuring time.